All right, folks, we are back, and I have on the phone with me today Mr. Daniel Miller with the Texas Nationalist Movement. In fact, if you want to go online while we are visiting here, the website is TNM. That's T as in Texas, N as in nationalist, M as in movement, TNM.me. Yes, .me. That's a weird one, but there it is, TNM.me. And you can find the Texas Nationalist Movement online. And Mr. Miller, welcome to the Matt Long Show. Thank you for coming on today.
Hey, Matt, thanks for the invitation.
So I know the secessionist movement has been around a long time, and my stand has been the same for many, many, many years, because as head of the Fredericksburg Tea Party, the different organizations who are seeking for an independent country of Texas or Republic of Texas have approached us and talked to us, and my attitude has been since day one is, look, I have no problem with you guys gathering, meeting, discussing, promoting your idea, no problem with it whatsoever. However, I still have faith in the United States. And I said, so y'all keep up the good work. And as long as I have faith in the United States, I can't join you. I can't join you. And so it's always been my stand. Now, listen, I got a good chuckle the morning after our two presidential candidates had a debate, and it made me laugh. I want you to tell the folks about that article. It said, I can't remember the exact title, but it said basically the real clear winner of last night's debate was the Texas Nationalist Movement. So would you talk to us about that, Mr. Miller? Tell us who you are, about you, and why that was a victory for you guys.
Sure. Let me a little background, and first off, before I do that, let me just say, Matt, that I appreciate you, giving your stance, at least being willing to have this discussion. There are a lot of folks out there that are in various Tea Party groups, constitutionalist, conservative organizations that won't even discuss this issue. Now, granted, there are those that will. I've spoken at plenty of Tea Party organization meetings, but it's been a wild ride for me. The TNM, the Texas Nationalist Movement, was founded in 2005, and I've been actually working on this particular issue since 1996. So, it's when we founded the TNM, the poll numbers that we had at our founding were single digits in favor of independence. And so, part of our work has been to go out and really educate people about the issue, to organize those people, and really engage the public. And as we did that, as we grew and aged a little bit, and got really steeped more in this particular issue than you could probably imagine, what we found is that across Texas, there has been a sentiment for a very long time that the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. are way out of touch, and that Texans would be better served by governing ourselves, free of that outside control, that outside influence. Mm-hmm. And the challenge has been over the years that, unfortunately, people, because of the mainstream media, believe that they were, in a very small minority or alone in that belief. So, oddly enough, one of the things that has propelled us to success, to turn us into one of the largest independence movements in the world, second largest in the Western Hemisphere, and one of the largest political organizations in Texas, is simply helping people understand that they are not alone. Texans, by and large, what we have seen, are extraordinarily concerned, and they're frustrated, and they chafe at the fact that they're governed by 180,000 pages of federal laws, rules, and regulations administered by 440 separate agencies, and 2.5 million unelected bureaucrats. At the end of the day, Texans really hold dear those principles that the United States was founded on. But in increasing numbers, we would say, based on our polling, and not just ours, but third-party polling, that's a plurality of Texans believe that Texas would be better served by governing ourselves as an independent, self-governing nation state.
You know, the original idea of this country, of these United States, was that we really all would be individual republics. And had we stuck with that idea, had the federal government, say, completely limited and paid attention to the 17 enumerated powers they had, and if it was functioning the way the founders of the country, the ideas of that, do you think you would still be pushing for a nationalist movement? Or is this, would that original idea, would you be happy with a Texas within that original union?
Well, you know, let's break down the original union, right? You hit on some of the high points, but if we're going to take it to, say, a modern analog, right? Mm-hmm. What you're looking at is these self-governing, independent nation states that are politically sovereign, culturally distinct, you know, economically unentangled, mm-hmm. but operate through this federal system that is essentially a free trade agreement between those states, mm-hmm. that share a common economic policy, a common currency, and a common defense policy, and, you know, essentially a postal treaty, right? I mean, that's literally what it's supposed to be.
Right.
And what's amazing is if you look at those aspects of what the Union was supposed to be, as it was originally intended, those types of treaty groups, alliances, those things exist between self-governing independent nation states around the world, mm-hmm. right? So, you know, it's not something that is unique. It's not a unicorn in the 21st century. But what's happened is, and you've hit the nail on the head. I think you were right on it. Is that the federal system has gathered more and more power to these unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., mm-hmm. through the power of taxation, through the liberal interpretations of the Interstate Commerce Clause. And in doing so, what they have done is they have virtually eliminated the independent character and the individual sovereignty of the states within that union.
Right.
And, and this is why we get what we get, where Texans overall pay somewhere between $103 to $160 billion over what we get back from the federal government every single solitary year.
Wow.
And so when Texas has to deal with issues like the border and illegal immigration, you just take that particular issue. We need to address that issue, but instead those decisions are being made by people that we didn't elect in Washington, D.C., that ultimately don't have to deal with the consequences of their poor decision-making.
Right.
So, I think you can understand why people are moving this direction. So, to your point, though, Matt, you were giving a lot of qualifying ifs, right? And if mm-hmm. ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas, right?
That's right.
And this is the challenge that we have. So your question to me was, would I still support it if it were that way? Well, I would submit to you that the likelihood of putting all of those things back in the Pandora's box and isolating Washington, D.C.
right.
Is probably less likely than getting Washington, D.C. being struck by a comet and saving us all this time and trouble and heartache.
So we're gonna need to take a break here in a minute or two, and I'd like hopefully you can stick around for another segment. Before we go though, what is the first step to what is the first step it would take for us to gain our independence? Do we need to write a declaration of independence? And then when we get back from the break, I want to talk really kind of more about the logistics, what things would look like as we pulled out of the Union or gained our independence. So on that first question, what is the first step to saying we're doing it? Is it go through the legislature? Is it the people? What does it look like?
Yeah, it's the good news is that we've seen two examples of this in the Western world in recent years of what really needs to happen, right? And that's the Scottish independence referendum and the Brexit referendum.
Okay.
And I say that because Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution is very specific that all political powers inherent in the people, and they have the right at all times to alter, reform, or abolish their form of government in such manner as they may think expedient. So we understand that at a constitutional and fundamental level here in Texas that it has to go to a vote of the people. Now, to make that happen, we need what is essentially enabling legislation. We need legislation that will give a vote to the people of Texas. You know, Matt, people talk all the time about where the poll numbers sit on this, and I have to tell them, look, poll numbers are great, right? You're calling up 1,000 people on the telephone, which everyone hates, right? Or they're taking online surveys. But at the end of the day, the only poll that matters is the one that Texans can go to and have their voice heard on this issue.
That's right. Folks, we're going to take a short break. We have Daniel Miller with us on the phone today. He's going to stick around for the third quarter here. Go check out the website while we're waiting, TNM.me. The top news article on there today has to do with a logistics question. So if we separate from the Union, what happens to the money you've paid into Social Security? That was a good article. And I was, as soon as I got through the first paragraph, and I said, yeah, okay, all right, that makes sense. Hey, when we get back, we're going to visit more with Mr. Miller and talk about legislation and logistics. What would it look like? What would an independent, free Republic of Texas look like? Y'all stay tuned. All right, folks, we are back. We have on the line with us today Daniel Miller. He is with the Texas Nationalist Movement. Go check out their website, tnm.me. Yes, it's got a weird extension, .me. Go check it out while we're talking. Mr. Miller, when I'm doing my daily research for my program, I keep one of the tabs I have up is your TNM.me tabs. You've done some good writing on saving the Alamo, and there's just usually some good information on there. So I highly recommend folks go take it out. The question we had before was, what does it take to get this process started? And you said a vote of the people, and there has been legislation in the past. I'm assuming you're going to have some legislation here in the next session. Where has been the bottleneck? How has the House and the Senate in Austin responded to this, to your legislation?
Yeah, back in 2009, around that time, we actually drafted some legislation, and it's evolved since then. But that legislation, which I include, it's on our website. People can get it. Plus, I included full text of it in my book, Texas, Why and How Texas Will Leave the Union. But there's the full text of it. And, every session we go walk the halls. We work it along with a lot of other issues. Our organization is not exclusively about the Texas referendum. Mm-hmm. But the bottleneck that we've come really close 3 times. Okay. To actually getting the legislation filed. The first time was when State Representative Leo Berman, who he essentially agreed to file it, and in that session he had a slew of bills that dealt with immigration, illegal immigration, and he was essentially threatened by Strauss, saying, if you Speaker of the House at the time, if you file this, I'm going to kill all your immigration bills. And ultimately, Berman backed down on our bill, and Strauss wound up killing all those immigration bills anyway. Then imagine Joe Strauss doing that, right?
Right.
And then the second time was James White actually went to file the bill, and the Texas Ledge Council, which you're familiar, many of your listeners may not be, but when these representatives and senators want to file a bill, they initially go to the Texas Ledge Council and they draft them in the form of a bill. And the Ledge Council would not submit the bill, move it to the next stage without stripping the referendum. So they took it from a bill to a resolution, and there were some interesting folks that signed on to that bill. We have a whole story about that on our website. You would be amazed at some of the reps that actually signed on to that. And then you move on to the third and final time, and the most recent, and it was when David Dewhurst was lieutenant governor, and we had sit-down meetings in his office and some follow-ups, and he was interested in helping us get this filed and getting it shepherded. But at the time, Greg Abbott was Attorney General getting ready for a run for governor, right? It's just ahead of his run for governor.
Right.
And Dewhurst's office reached out. He said, look, we want to have the Attorney General in on this. And Abbott refused because he was afraid it would affect his election chances. So, for governor. So we've been close 3 times, but we continue to work it. And every time we gain, a few more allies, we bend a few more ears, but as things get closer, as we get down the road a little bit more, it's a bit of a slow burn, but we'll get there.
So let's look into the crystal ball here for a second, and let's say this next session we get legislation through, and the citizens of Texas get to vote on it next November, and the citizens of Texas say 3/4 of them say we want independence. By golly, so it's a landslide next November in the constitutional election. What do you think what would it look like after that? What are the logistics? Listen, I know a lot of Texans that are really, man, they're dadgummit, they're proud of Texas, and you say, yeah, we ought to become our own country, and they go, yeah, right, and is this, what would the logistics look like? What do you think, and here's the bottom line to me, do you think this can be done with no blood spilt?
Absolutely. I have an entire chapter of the book called Project Fear, which I cribbed the name off of the anti-Scottish independence campaign and honestly the anti-Brexit campaigns. But, there is when these issues come up, particularly in, governments or unions that have our style of government, the biggest weapon that the opposition has, the people, the centralists, the people that want to maintain the center of power and rob us of the right of self-government, that's their biggest weapon is fear, right?
No, absolutely.
So what they do is, these guys, and I always love, when I get interviewed by these progressives, right?
Right.
They, New York Times, different places, they always bring up, it's going to be a second Civil War, and they bring up the 1860s, and they talk about the military invading, and when they do that, immediately that they have not looked at it in depth and with any seriousness whatsoever. Because if they had, they would, first and foremost realize that when they woke up this morning, the calendar said 2020, not 1861, right? This is the 21st century, not the 19th century. So, we look back over the last 70-plus years of this idea of decentralization, where these countries or states or territories or country, these areas opt for the right of self-government, and we find out that in the vast majority of cases, these have been executed peacefully, and in some instances, you actually have this as the solution to the violent conflict, right? A peaceful political divorce. Sudan was an example of that. 30-year civil war, millions dead. They're trying to kill each other, and finally they said, wouldn't it just be easier if we agreed to disagree and govern ourselves the way that we wanted to? Boom, end of civil war.
Right.
So, the practical aspect, I mean, when people think about this, if you really break it down, will the United States invade Texas over a Texas vote? And the question you have to ask yourselves is, will the people of Texas, will the United States military, right, by and large, many of who still revere the Constitution,
right,
will they enter into Texas and slaughter Texans because they voted the wrong way?
Right.
Is that ultimately what we're talking about? And if that is the case, then we better get out of here sooner rather than later, because that is not the America that any of us believe in.
Boy, that is so true. Very well put. I appreciate the way you put that. I guess, I guess there's a lot of people that would think that, well, this nationalist movement is kind of like a dog chasing a car. What in the world he's going to do if he catches it? And so it's good to hear, it's like, oh my goodness, what are you going to do now? Tell us about your book. We just have a couple of minutes left, and I'll bet you there's a lot of good information in your book about the ideas behind this movement and how to do it. So tell us about your book and where we can get it, and tell us about your website.
Sure, Matt. I wrote the book through our publisher, Defiance Press, and what I wanted to do was try to consolidate all of these concepts, right? I didn't want to make it a textbook, but I wanted to consolidate these concepts, explain what the political and cultural motivations are for Texas and its supporters, to talk about the things that are holding us back, what independence looks like, in other words, the path to get to a referendum and what it looks like in the immediate aftermath, and some longer-term impacts to answer questions like, what are we going to do about national defense? What happens to, people that are receiving Social Security? How do we handle the border? And how do we split up the national debt? And I touch on all of those things in the book. Amazingly, when it came out, it became a bestseller in its category on Amazon. I think I was pretty surprised, probably more surprised than anyone else. But you began to see some suppression from Amazon and from some of these social media giants, and we've got articles about that on our website, explaining all of that in detail. But that's when I knew that we were on to something. Right. When they began to play with the book, we knew that we were over the target, and we knew that we had hit a nerve. And since then, we've done a tremendous job. A lot of the information you can find on TNM.me, but if you want it in one handy spot, you could pick up a copy of the book, and it's still available now, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, on our website at TNM.me. But, Matt, I'll tell you this. I think out of that book, the thing that I think is the most important thing for people to understand, if they are wrestling with this issue, right? If they're kind of like you, maybe on the fence, really not decided on it, not ready to give up, I think ultimately the question that it asks that helps people in that space where you're at is this. If right now Texas were an independent, self-governing nation state, and a political movement that is the opposite of ours popped up to get Texas to join the Union, would you vote to join the Union? And, when that question is asked, as I'm posing it to you, when that question is asked, you have to begin to run down the laundry list of what we would be accepting.
Right.
What would we be accepting? Nearly $30 trillion of debt, right? That we don't see any benefit. Paying $103 to $160 billion, having an overpayment into the federal government that is the economic equivalent of a Hurricane Harvey hitting Texas every 9 months.
Yeah.
I mean, is that a selling point? Because you start running through those lists, and I'll tell you, Matt, I don't know how they could sell joining the Union to if Texas were independent right now, right? They may be able to sell statehood to Puerto Rico or Washington, D.C., which is something they're trying to do to upset the entire electoral balance. But I don't know how they could sell joining the Union to an independent Texas. And at this point, I don't know how they can sell staying in the Union to any Texan who values liberty and freedom and prosperity.
Well, boy, so well put. We're going to have to leave it at there. I guess I've got one more argument I can give you. I'll give you this one for free to make to bring people over to your side. In the new Republic of Texas, we will not allow anyone from California to stay more than 3 days in the state. And I think if you put that in the new Texas Constitution, that you'd probably flip about half of those people still waiting. What do you think, Daniel?
Well, I'll tell you what. California is not on anybody's list of favorites, right?
That's right.
If MySpace were still a thing, California would be in no one's top 5.
There you go. Mr. Miller, it's been a real pleasure to have you on here. Thank you very much. I look forward to visiting with you. Folks, go check out tnm.me. Very well written articles. And certainly check out Mr. Miller's book if you want more information on the Texas nationalist movement. All right, folks, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. And, yeah, I got to talk about